Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a un nuevo capítulo de los Encuentros del Futuro que nos permiten conocer las visiones de distintos especialistas y referentes de nivel mundial en múltiples disciplinas con interesantes reflexiones con motivo de los congresos del futuro. ¿Cómo se relaciona la investigación espacial con los problemas terrenales y qué esfuerzos se están haciendo para poder llevar esos resultados a todo el mundo y contribuir a comprender de mejor forma fenómenos como el cambio climático? Son materias que la doctora Danielle Wood nos ayuda a repensar en este capítulo sobre soluciones tecnológicas para el mundo.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidos a un nuevo capítulo de Encuentros del Futuro. Hoy día los vamos a invitar a mirar un poquito fuera de nuestro planeta y aterrizar esa conversación. Vamos a hablar de cómo el desarrollo de la tecnología del espacio nos impacta en nuestro día a día y cuáles son los avances que van en ese camino. Para ello vamos a conversar con Danielle Wood. Ella es doctora de Sistemas de Ingeniería, profesora asistente en el Programa de Artes y Ciencias de los Medios en el Laboratorio de Medios del MIT, donde lidera el grupo de investigación de habilitación espacial que busca, entre otras cosas, la justicia a los sistemas complejos de la Tierra, tomando estas herramientas del espacio y aplicándolas en nuestra día a día. Daniel, we're very pleased to have you in here. First of all, to have a general perspective, how does the technologies from the space applies in our daily life nowadays?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I lead the Space-Enabled Research Group, where we have the mission to help and use technology from space to support sustainable development on Earth. In particular, there are 6 types of space technology that currently are being used by governments and companies and nonprofit organizations around the world to help improve daily life on Earth. These technologies include satellite-based Earth observation, where satellites are used to take measurements of what's happening in the atmosphere, on the land, in the ocean, and also in the ice. It also includes satellites for communication services and positioning. We do other research in space in areas like what is the effect of microgravity or the lack of gravity on the human body, on plants, on animals. And the results of this research also can be used to improve life on Earth. In addition, when we design technology to be used for human exploration and other space activity, sometimes we can transfer that technology and redesign it for life on Earth. For example, the water filtration system and the techniques to help prepare growing food in space in the future also can be used to improve life on Earth and improve water access or the operation and the use of food. Finally, it means a lot when countries invest in fundamental research about astronomy, astrophysics, and understanding how the sun affects the Earth. All of this brings useful knowledge. It also creates infrastructure, education, and inspiration. And these are also valuable tools as part of our sustainable development on Earth.
How can this apply in a country like ours that has a very diverse climate? For example, we have very dry and hot deserts in the north, and then quite the opposite at Patagonia with ice and very cold winters. So how can we use the satellite technology, for example, to see how is the climate changing, acting in those so different areas?
Every country is using data from Earth science satellites in order to understand our global climate and what's happening locally. Before I worked at MIT, I had the opportunity to work at NASA, and there my job was to help convert the results of Earth science research using satellite data into benefits in areas including understanding agriculture and food security, as well as water resource management, disaster response, and also public health and air quality. Right now, in a country like Chile, there is information that can be shared through international data exchange. A number of governments around the world operate scientific satellites that take measurements about the environment. And a lot of the data from the United States, from Europe, from Japan, from many countries is shared freely online so that scientists around the world can do analysis, both about global patterns and about what's happening locally. In order to understand what's happening in one country, we first often create models that tell us what's happening throughout the world, in the atmosphere, for example, or the oceans. Then we can zoom in and think about the issues for one particular country. Satellites can help us measure what's changing, for example, with ice, either in mountains or in the poles. We are, of course, close to Antarctica here, also it's part of the story. Satellites also can help us understand what's the state of the water on the surface, or even soil moisture, and even what's happening with water underground. Often, scientists take the measurements from satellites and organize it in complex computer models that are simulating what's happening in the environment. Then we can ask what's happening today and what do we expect will happen tomorrow. We can look at how humans are changing our environment and how to prepare for disasters.
Yeah. That's very important for us. We had the experience, for example, in the 2010 earthquake. We had a lack, for example, of satellite telephones, and there was a very big concerns about communications those days. And the other impact is with the water research. Here in Chile, one of the main exports are fruits. How can this water research in the space could be useful for our agriculture with the fruit exportations?
Yes, it's very relevant to consider information from satellite Earth observation to help inform national and local planning for agriculture and to understand the role of water in influencing the growth of plants. In order to think about this topic, the first step is to ask, what are the rainfall patterns? We can use satellites with microwave sensors and radars to understand the rainfall locally and globally. There are satellites already in operation in several countries that combine their measurements of actual rainfall and snowfall and share daily videos and data sets for everyone to use. That information can be put into a model that helps describe where the rain goes when it falls in a certain region. You would want to know the shape of the land, the type of soil, and then you can use that to estimate which part of the land will have enough water to grow plants. Later, you can use a different satellite to monitor the growth of the plants through the season and to determine if it's receiving enough water, if it needs more fertilizer, if it is healthy. So there are several stages, both for planning and for watching the plants grow.
Sadly, all these technologies are not affordable or accessible for all the people all over the world. One of your topics is justice for access for these advances. So what can you tell us about the justice to make that every people in the whole world can access to these research and technologies?
In my space-enabled research group at MIT, our mission is to advance justice in Earth's complex systems using designs enabled by space. For us, justice has two meanings. The first is that a just world is one in which we reach the Sustainable Development Goals as defined by the United Nations and agreed upon by many governments around the world. This is a list of the key goals we have set to improve life through making sure everyone has access to food, to basic human needs like healthcare and energy, but also to make sure that our cities and society are sustainable. Justice also means that technology, such as those from space, should be accessible to everyone no matter where they live. Every child should be able to grow up thinking that they'd like to work on space engineering if they want to. For now, there are questions of access to education and to technology. In some countries, it's very difficult to learn about space technology as part of the education, but this is changing as many countries are creating new educational programs or university projects to build satellites. In addition, this is happening right here in Chile and in many other countries in Latin America and in Africa. Also for us, justice would mean that the benefits, the results from many satellite missions can be shared. Now the good news is that many of the governments that operate Earth science satellites or other scientific research with satellites do share the data freely. So it's not so much the cost that is an issue, but there's also a question of preparation. Often it requires advanced knowledge and study, perhaps with a doctoral degree, to truly understand some of the information we gain from space. So we need business models and design in order to transfer this information in a way that can be used by more people.
And in that way, how can or how important is the collaborative ways between countries? For example, space agencies only have the richest countries like the US, China, maybe India or the European Union, but in Chile it's impossible to think to have a space agency. How important is that Chile approach to those countries to can have some results of their research and then apply them here?
Actually, I disagree. I think it's not impossible for a country like Chile to have a space agency. A lot of my research has been dialoguing with leaders in Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, who are creating some type of office in their country to think about how their country will use space technology. Here in Latin America, there are several countries very active in space. Countries like Brazil and Argentina started their space activities early in the space era in the 60s and 70s, and they have, of course, developed great capabilities. But other countries came later and either developed first non-government activities, and now they have government programs, or the government has taken the lead. So countries like Mexico do have a space agency focused on how they can apply space technology and these applications and engineering training in the country. Also, you see the same in countries in Africa, like South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana. They have space agencies, but they are focused on the needs of the country. And I think a country like Chile can consider this as well, to think about how different players in the government, the new Ministry of Science, the universities, how they can come together to apply space. And already it has started because the government has had several satellite projects, and there are several now from the University of Chile. And this is progress already in training people and in creating the capability here in Chile to use space for development.
And in that way, I want to ask you about the importance of the newly created Ministry of Science. It's like less than a year ago, and in that way, how important is that Chile organizes this kind of congress, like Congreso Futuro, where scientists and investigators from all over the world meet and talk each other right here?
It is very exciting to see Chile establish the Ministry of Science, and it gives an opportunity for a new level of focus. Many of the activities would have been shared before, perhaps by the Minister of Education, by others, but now there is someone who can take care to consider that the role of science is being valued in several different aspects of the economy, both for basic research and to improve opportunities for business and for advancing areas like tourism or agriculture.
Daniel, we are making a very short pause. Vamos a una pequeña pausa para después seguir conversando con Daniel Wood sobre toda la investigación aeroespacial y cómo esta se va a aplicar en nuestro día a día en la agricultura y también en muchos otros tópicos. Vamos y volvemos. Estamos de vuelta en Encuentros del Futuro, estamos conversando con Daniel Wood, ella es doctora en sistemas de ingeniería, profesora también del MIT, y con ella estamos conversando algo bastante entretenido, las aplicaciones de los desarrollos de la tecnología aeroespacial en nuestro día a día. Daniel, we are back, and now I want to talk with you about a life-changing experience you had. You went to Kenya, and then there your mind kind of changed. You see a very different reality. What's your opinion, and why did you went there?
I was fortunate to have my first visit to Africa and visit the country of Kenya when I was 19 years old. And I really wanted to visit and learn about the life, especially of young girls in this country and other countries around the world where girls face many challenges. I wanted to ask how they can have the chance to grow up and choose a path or a career that they're interested in. I spent some time volunteering at a school for girls whose families had a challenge to pay for school. And I spent time practicing math lessons and English lessons with them. And at the end, I wanted to ask myself how I could use my training as I was studying aerospace engineering to think about improving the life of young girls around the world, especially girls who face challenges in pursuing the education or the careers that are interesting for them. There are still places all around the world, including where I grew up in the US, where it's difficult for girls to pursue the opportunities that they are interested in because either there are stereotypes that make them feel like they should not be in engineering or science, or there are actual difficulties due to long-term injustice or poverty in their community. So I wanted to find out how I could play some role. But I was concerned because I was studying space engineering in the university, and I thought perhaps this was not relevant to trying to make it possible for girls to have more opportunities and better careers. Later, I understood that actually every country can use the knowledge from space engineering and from space science as part of opening up new opportunities to serve the country, and that this also is a path that young girls around the world can help be a leader in. And so now I can connect my interest in development and improving opportunities for girls and boys, no matter where they live, to be involved with the careers that are interesting, especially in science and math. And I still am a space engineer, and they come together as one vision.
Wonderful. So you once said, and I quote, colonialism, racism, and gender inequality had all excluded a lot of people from the benefits we can get from the space. Why did you say that, in which context, and how can you explain those words?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to explain why I talk about colonialism and racism and gender inequality. Currently at the university, at MIT, where I work, I teach a class asking, can space technology enable sustainable development? In this class, we read history books before we talk about engineering and science, because I want the students and I to explore what have been the patterns for the distribution of power and access to technology that has led to the current state of the world as we see it today. We look at some examples. It's actually difficult to look everywhere, but we consider, for example, the role of the colonial patterns of leadership that occurred in the period of the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. This is an era when a few countries used either their military power or their financial power to affect many other countries around the world, creating patterns of international interaction, including slavery and global slave trade, as well as colonial occupation of countries. A lot of the results of those choices that were made then are still affecting the nature of our countries today and the nature of access for groups. In the United States in particular, we can still see the form of institutional racism that means that some groups continue to be at a disadvantage as a group. In particular, I'm African American, and I think it's very clear if we look at a lot of data around the experience of African Americans in the US, that we had an era of slavery, we had later eras of segregation, and even today we have an era in which there are a disproportionate number of black men and women in prison today compared to the percentage in the population in general. All of these realities make it difficult, for example, for some communities to fully participate in using technology and science to make our world better. And the challenges we face today are so important and so daunting that we cannot afford to not have access to all the brilliant minds that are available. Instead, we need to have every community, no matter what color or background they are, fully engaged in addressing issues like climate change and global poverty.
In that way, I want to ask you about which are the challenges for the space technology, considering all the justice we need to grant access to everyone, everywhere.
There are a few questions today. We are actually in the middle of changing how we think about building and operating systems in space. The space era started around 1950s when we had the first satellites go to space, and we learned how to build satellites, have them orbit the Earth, have them go to travel to different parts of the solar system, and now beyond. Now is exciting because we see a lot of investment in space technology from several governments around the world, as well as from private companies and universities. So there are small satellites, we use this phrase, small satellites, that are designed with a new kind of engineering idea, which is that instead of building the best possible expensive satellite that will last a long time in space, we can build smaller, cheaper satellites that actually are not meant to last a long time, but are meant to be affordable to manufacture and to launch. Now this is exciting, and it means new companies and new universities are creating new ways of using satellites. It also means we should think about not putting too many satellites in space that will become trash when they are finished. We have this problem of creating space debris. So in the future, what my research group is considering is how are we going to have manufacturing and management of the activities in space. In fact, there are many groups around the world thinking about new engineering techniques to manufacture satellites so they do not create as much debris, new ways of operating them, and new national and international policies to ensure that when we put satellites in space, they are not going to create additional trash beyond what is required.
And with all this big data and stuff, how can we be sure that this data get in good hands and not maybe used for evil purposes?
You know, we create a lot of data when we use satellites to observe the Earth or when we are having communication systems that pass information. But the data we create from space is not so different from data we form for other sources. So it's true that there are big responsibilities with data from space as well as from sources through social media, as well as through all the measurements we can take with sensors on Earth, I think we should consider this all as one related problem. It's not that there's space data and other data, there's just data, and whether it's coming from space or from sensors and sources on Earth, we should be thinking creatively about how to organize it so you can find it, how to keep it free when possible, or protect it when needed. The good news is that the information we have from space, there are some situations in which it is to everyone's benefit to share. For now, there are a lot of free Earth science data that is shared freely, and when everyone has access, then it's less likely that one group will use it in a negative way, because everyone else has access to the same information. There are a few cases where we have to take extra care, but in many cases, actually sharing it openly is the way to avoid causing harm.
Once again, I want to take you to the past and talk about another life-changing experience. You, when you were a child, you saw the launch of a space shuttle, and then you decided you want to be a space engineer. What can you tell us about that experience and the message for the little girls that could be encouraged with that example?
I was fortunate to grow up in Florida. In particular, I lived in Orlando, and my mother taught me that we should celebrate what our government was doing through NASA, and that we should always spend time to follow the news. If there was a launch of a NASA space shuttle happening, if it's possible, we would go outside to see it. Even in our home, we could watch the launches. But it is quite different to actually go stand a few miles away from where NASA does their launches. From there, you actually can see all the bright lights during the launch very clearly. You can even feel the vibrations of the loud sounds that happen when a rocket launches from the Earth. When I was 17, I worked as an intern, as a student scholar, spending time at NASA. And it was during the period in which NASA and several other countries, including those from Europe, from Canada, from Russia and Japan, were constructing the International Space Station. So we have a US laboratory that's now in space, but it was physically on the ground, and I could see it in the preparation for launch. And I could say, this thing that I'm looking at is going to space one day. So I was so excited to understand how countries were working together to make a construction of a huge building that would be in orbit around the Earth. And I saw the launch of the Chandra X-ray Observatory. And this is one of the satellites that carries a special set of equipment to do astronomy research. And in particular, it's receiving light that's in the part of the spectrum called the X-ray. And it can help us understand what happened in the early part of the universe and what's happening in very distant galaxies. I was so inspired because these technical challenges were very difficult, but they were possible because the teams of thousands of people came together to put these missions together for the space station or for the astronomy satellite. And I felt very moved to join this activity, but I also thought to myself that even as I continued to study aerospace engineering in university, and as I started to work as an engineer, I wanted to also do work that would serve humans and help their life be better on Earth.
In that way, you were a little bit lucky to live near Cape Canaveral, but nowadays it's very difficult for many women and little girls all over the world to be enough brave to study science when a lot of people, mainly men, said that science is a men work. What can you tell us about that, and how would you encourage little women to break these stereotypes?
Of course, I would like every young girl to believe that she can pursue any dream she has. And I think we just have to recognize that it's a myth that only men are doing science and engineering. Of course, I was inspired, like many people, to learn and read the history from the book called Hidden Figures, and to meet the author who had researched the fact that they were black women and women of many backgrounds working in NASA and in actually the organization that came before NASA, even to help do advanced math and computer science at the beginning of the space era. They didn't get as much credit at the time from the leadership and from history. But we can say that women and people of different backgrounds, people who might be minorities ethnically, have always been involved with making possible the key advances in science. So even though sometimes the textbooks, they show examples of people that made discoveries, and they may only show the men, often there were women involved who just were not mentioned in the history book, but who were right there. And so we must actually look back at history and correct times when the stories were not told completely, and then help the young girls know that they can also continue like these women have in the past. Then we must also look at policies to make sure that when women enter the workforce, there are supports so that we treat both men and women the same to give them opportunities for taking care of their families and for taking breaks to serve their children or their parents while also progressing in their career. There should be no disadvantage to be a woman or a man serving your family while also working.
So, Daniel, thank you for your words. Thank you so much for having you in here. We enjoyed a lot this conversation. Con esto damos fin a este capítulo de Encuentros del Futuro. Estuvimos con Daniel Wood, conversamos entonces sobre los avances de la tecnología aeroespacial, cómo se aplican a la Tierra y también la necesidad de justicia para darles a todos un acceso entonces a estos avances tecnológicos. Los invitamos también a seguir atentos, a estar atentos a los próximos Encuentros del Futuro, donde se podrá enterar más de los avances de la ciencia y la tecnología. Que esté muy bien. Chao.
La investigación nos abre la cabeza para que cada uno haga sus propias lecturas e interpretaciones de determinados resultados y, por supuesto, para que usemos nuestras experiencias personales planteando el uso de esas conclusiones. Esperando haber generado en ustedes un espacio de reflexión desde la Facultad de Ciencias Físicas y Matemáticas de la Universidad de Chile, nos dejamos invitados hasta una siguiente oportunidad.